Welcome, Nookster. In this community, we focus on connection, relaxation, and inspiration. When you snuggle into your nook every Sunday morning to read my email, you can invite in what you need that day. As often as I can, I will add in recorded conversations, like this one that you're about to enjoy, that will help with your writing process, whether you are on your first book or your 20th.
Thank you for joining me today, Walter. So I'm really excited to hear more about your experience as an FBI agent. So you were with the Bureau for about 20 years. Is that correct?
I started in 1980, and I left the bureau right at the end of 1999. So yeah, you're right. It's just about 20 years.
And yeah, I know it's been some time since you retired, but I do believe your knowledge and experience is going to be really valuable to authors. So our goal today is just going to be as detailed as possible so they can use this information and be creative from there with their books. So I thought I would start with the training. So I believe you start in the academy. Do they call it the academy?
They do, and I'll reiterate what you were saying is that I retired from federal service in 2005 and left the FBI at the beginning of 2000. So a lot of information I have is obviously going to be dated, but then there's a lot of a lot of information that will remain consistent, particularly with regard to basics. So the academy, the FBI Academy, is at Quantico, Virginia, and it is the only academy for FBI agents to attend then and now.
Okay. And can you describe a bit what it's like? Like, is it like a university? Do you stay there? Or how is that done?
It There was a bit of the university setting in terms of dormitories and cafeteria style eating, except for there were firearms training and emergency vehicle operation training, unlike college. But there was a lot of classroom um, time that was spent. So that too would be like a university setting, and the folks that you are attending the academy with are all the basic requirements. Back in the when I hired on was at least a 4-year college degree. But that being said, typically it's without an advanced degree, you pretty much are not truly competitive unless you have a particular skill set that's very desirable at a particular time. For instance, with cybersecurity, sometimes those folks that have that kind of a background in cyber may have an advantage. Likewise, depending upon language spoken, that too might be an advantage. But at the end of the day, it's a 4-year college degree is the basic requirement. So the people that you are attending the academy with are all advanced degreed. For the most part, all have a particular job experience and work experience. So that's the part that's not like college, where you're attending with younger people who are at the very front end of a career or working on creating a background that'll be desirable for a career. The folks there have had plenty of experience and education to get them there.
Okay. Yeah, I believe that's similar to what today is. You need a university or some sort of a degree to go. So I believe that's still relevant too. Can you describe a bit about the academy? Like on TV shows, for instance, they seem to be like concrete walls and kind of very, yeah, not very decorative. But do you remember more of what the academy looked like?
Well, the academy setting was it's in Virginia, probably 60 miles south of Washington D.C. It's co-located with a Marine Corps training base, Quantico, and it's a beautiful setting. So that it's a wooded area. There's There's a lake that's there on the academy grounds. It's a beautiful setting, and the training facility itself doesn't belie the fact that it is a college campus, but the fact that it has that sort of a feel to it, it's not that stark concrete kind of um, uh, training facility that you sometimes see on television. It has a lot of character and a lot of personality, and it was really a pleasant place to be. Um, but for the fact that you're there for training, and you're there for a very specific training for a very specific career. So there's a lot of tension in the air because you have people who, in reality, you're competing for a special agent position. I mean, you're there, you've already been hired, you're already accepted into the FBI, but the reality of it is, if you don't pass the academy, you're going home, and you're not going to have that career. So that part of the competitiveness and the tension is there. But like I said, it's a beautiful campus, it's a beautiful facility, and it's a state of the art facility when it comes to the training grounds with regard to firearms, with regard to the mock city that's there, where there's exercises that are carried out. So there is the state of the art part of it as well.
You mentioned passing. So is it, do you pass it? Do you graduate?
You do, and that too is it's with the university comparison, you cross the stage, but instead of a diploma, you're handed your credentials. So you're handed your FBI credentials after you've completed the required training. And at one point, when we first got there at the academy, day one was filled with all kinds of questions, as it would be, and as you would expect. You want to know your surroundings, and know what's expected, know what kinds of surprises there might be. So you've got your eyes wide open, and you're looking, and you're paying attention. I visited with a fella who's and this isn't unusual. His brother was an FBI agent, and I believe his uncle was an FBI agent. So he had a lifelong goal of being an FBI agent, and now here he is at the FBI Academy. By day 4, he was gone.
By choice or?
His was by choice,
Okay.
and I think that the pressure was so overwhelming being there, and having that nervousness and the nervous tension that's already in the air, the expectations, uh, because they tell you right up front, here, this is going to be a very rigorous training. There's going to be a lot of expectations. There's a physical aspect to it. There's firearms, and there's classroom training. And so the pressure was already starting to be applied, and the guy was gone. And throughout the class, we had another person was left because of an injury, was injured during a training, because you have exercises where you boxing, you wrestling. So you have these defensive tactics sessions, and sometimes people get hurt. You get hurt, you go home. So, and likewise with firearms, that you have to be able to pass a required regimen of firearms qualifications, or likewise you're out.
And how long are you at the academy for?
Well, back then it was 16 weeks, and I didn't look online before we had this conversation, so I'm not sure what it is right now. But when I went through, it was 16 weeks.
And this might sound like an odd question, but did you guys have uniforms or were there any particular rules in regards to appearance?
At the time, we had um, the collared sport shirt. They were light blue and khaki pants. So it was a uniform, but it didn't feel as much like a uniform as you would imagine, because and it was a more relaxed. It felt more relaxed because it wasn't a particular and specific uniform. And again, today, I don't know what it would be that they're wearing.
So once you graduate, is everyone a special agent, even if you're like a non-field agent?
Uh, when you go through the FBI Academy, that training is well. Now there's a whole host of other training that occurs at the academy, but there is specifically a special agent training, and at the end, when you graduate, you are a special agent of the FBI.
So once you become a special agent, what's your schedule like? Like how many hours per week did you work or
Well, that's a on its face a fairly simple question. I mean, it's an 8 to 5 job, but it's not really an 8 to 5 job. And one of the things that is important to note about the FBI is, although you are a special agent of the FBI, it sounds very singular and very specific, but in reality, it's there are so many positions within the FBI. So you can imagine there are agents who work and concentrate on white collar crime cases. There are agents who work and investigate violations of drug statute. There are agents who work domestic terrorism, international terrorism, foreign counterintelligence, violent crimes, bank robberies, kidnappings, extortions. So that list just goes on and on. And dependent upon what that particular assignment is when you're in the FBI could dictate whether you have a job that would equate more to an 8 to 5 kind of a job, or a job that might require 16-hour days.
okay. And I think touching on that, I think everyone would want to know. Have you seen Criminal Minds? You ever watched that show?
No.
Oh, okay. So it's about the FBI and they've got a behavioral analysis unit. So it's about profilers. Do you guys have a unit like that? Do you do profiling, psychological profiling?
When I went through the FBI, the behavioral science unit was in its nascent stages. So it was there at the academy, housed at the academy. So we actually had an instructor come in and talk to us, and he'd done interviews of serial killers. And I'll never forget this guy. He was right out of central casting. He looked like what you would expect an FBI agent to look like. Tall, physically fit, handsome guy, dressed in a very sharp suit, and he comes in, but he's talking in real low tones. And so everybody's leaning forward a little bit to listen to this guy. And as he's talking about interviewing these serial killers, and he's talking about, I think he might have been talking about Jeffrey Dahmer at one point, and then he just exploded like that, and everybody is set back in their seat, but it was kind of a dramatic moment, and I'll never forget it because everybody was so interested in what he was talking about, the serial killers, and being able to create that profile of you know what basically what motivates them, how they operate, how they behave. I mean, it was definitely um, very interesting, and like I said, the beginnings of it, and then gradually it became more important and more important throughout the ensuing years, because it became even critical in some cases to be able to get the insight from the behavioral science unit.
Okay, and what unit did you work in?
Well, when I left the academy, in my first office, I was assigned to a violent crime squad. So I worked bank robberies, kidnappings, extortions, and it was, as it turned out, and also on that squad was fugitives. And as it turned out, I had a penchant, you'd say, maybe a skill, a knack, whatever it was. I was pretty good at it. So it ended up, oftentimes especially as a new agent, they rotate you to other squads. And when my rotation time came, I asked if I could continue to do what I was doing because I enjoyed it, I was comfortable, and I was good at it. So I was able to stay for the 2 years that I was in a small to mid-sized office. I stayed working violent crimes. And then when I transitioned to what they called a top 12 office, one of the big offices, um, at that point, I transferred into the same kind of a squad, a violent crime squad. So the majority of my career was working violent crimes, bank robberies, kidnappings, extortions, and such.
Okay, and what type of duties did you have? Like, were you at your desk a lot? Were you in the field?
It was an interesting time because I was in the bureau eh, during a time that there was a transition. And the transition, when I first went to the bureau, there were you could have a stenographer come to your desk and you would dictate your reports. So you're actually dictating to a person, and then you'd also, most of the time you dictate into a dictaphone or a tape recorder, and you're dictating to cassettes. So you had a stenographer that would be typing out all your reports and typing out all your correspondence, and whatever other paper documents you were working on would be handled by someone else. But then it there was this transition that started probably in the mid '90s, where agents started typing their own reports and typing their own documents. So what that did is it put people in the office more than they were out on the street.
Okay, and then when you were in like out on the street, what did you like? What were your duties there? Like, did you collect evidence? Did you question eyewitnesses or?
So as an FBI agent, and it's one of the things that I found interesting on the front end is that there was sort of this cookie cutter feel to it, that if you're a special agent, you're able to do whatever is required of the FBI. So you weren't pigeonholed as a violent crimes agent or as a white collar crime. You were an FBI agent, so you were expected to be able to do whatever it was that came up at any given time within the FBI's purview. So that being the case, you had to maintain a level of skill across the board when it comes to investigations, right? So you're right, evidence collection, having some knowledge about what that evidence, what constitutes evidence, how to handle evidence, how to treat evidence, how to gather evidence, how to know when it's evidence that you shouldn't mess with and that you find the experts to come in and take care of. The other part, but probably the most important part of the job, is interviews, and to be able to talk to people and talk to people that um, it's not every day they meet an FBI agent. And oftentimes you talk to folks and they may have never talked to an FBI agent in their lives. All of a sudden, here's somebody who's got their credentials opened up, saying, I'm Walter with the FBI. I want to talk to you about whatever that is. And a lot of times it's not a comfortable conversation, particularly when you're looking for fugitives. You might be talking to a mother, brother, sister, father, grandmother about their relative who is a fugitive, and you need to find out the information to be able to find them. So you have to know how to talk to people, and you have to know how to relate to people. You have to know how to get information. So, I talk to young people today and I say that it's critical. And one of the things that I think is the most important thing for young folks is to create and develop a network. And when you say that, people think automatically you're talking about that those are all your group of friends. It's not a group of friends. They don't have to be friends. You don't even have to like them for that matter. But it's you create a network, and a network is and you have to look after it, support it, and take care of it. Well, that was kind of the same thing in the FBI, and oftentimes that was the informants that you would recruit. And when you talk about, and it's talked about on television in different ways, that it's rats and snitches and so on and so forth. It really isn't. What it is it's people that you make a note and you put it in your Rolodex, and you remember that this person is a truck driver, this person is a welder, This person is a bank executive. This person is. So at some point, when you're conducting an investigation, you might need to talk to one of those people to gain background understanding about a particular silo of business or a particular occupation. Now you have a network, and the network is taken care of by exactly that: being able to talk to people, being able to understand people, making people comfortable.
Okay, and relating to interviews, did you conduct a lot of interrogations?
I conducted particularly with regard to bank robberies, because I worked a lot of bank robbery cases, investigated a lot of bank robbery cases. So I'd arrested quite a few people who had robbed banks. Well, the first thing that you do is you conduct an interview.
And how did you start, like, any tips or interrogation techniques? You see a lot of that on TV as well, like when you can tell someone's lying or they focus a lot on that, but
And recently, there's a podcast series of retired agents who are interviewed on this podcast series, and it's a really well done series. I listened to a fellow who talked about interviews and interrogations. He approached it in a very thoughtful, deliberate, almost scientific way, but he would lay out a strategy for each interview. He would do as much background as he could do to gather information about the person he was interviewing, to figure out if there was weaknesses, if there were vulnerabilities, if there were touch points that he could bring up that might evoke or elicit information. It was, and so I thought about it, because for my interviews, it wasn't that at all. It was, I knew what happened. I knew there was a bank robbery. I know exactly how the bank was robbed, what happened, the circumstances of it all. I know exactly why I arrested the person. So the interview was very straightforward. And at that point, it's about being able to talk sense to somebody. And one of the things that I would um, sometimes do is take them through a McDonald's drive-through on the way to the office. And because there's a couple of things. Oftentimes they were drug addicts, so they were hurting for drugs, and a meal would sometimes calm them down a little bit, and usually get an orange juice with it, with the McDonald's meal. Um, and then when you take them back to the office, and I would say, you're looking at a very difficult time ahead of you, and it may be a while before you're eating in a restaurant or a McDonald's again. So let's do this and enjoy it. And we sat down. Well, that's already set the stage, and then it's a matter of just saying, "Here we are. Let's figure this out, and let's problem solve it together. Either you're going to go to prison for a very long time, or we're going to figure out something that's going to work."
okay. And you mentioned being able to do a variety of cases or tasks when you work with the FBI. How did case assignments work? I see a lot on TV of working on cases that you have a connection to. Is that something you're actually allowed to do?
Um, well, you shouldn't have a case that you're connected to. I mean, it kind of depends on what you mean by a connection or connected to. If it's something you have knowledge about, obviously, then they want you working a case that if you know how to work bank robberies, if you know how to work white collar crime, domestic terrorism, you're going to be assigned based on your experience and the fact that that's the kind of cases that you're assigned to. If you have any other kind of a connection, a personal connection or anything else, then typically it's not a good idea to work a case like that. Um, Creates all kinds of issues, right? And for one, I had a high school classmate that got in a shootout with the police and all kinds of issues. And when I heard that he was wanted, I said, "Well, hey, I'll take the case," because I figured it'd be easier for me than anyone else to find him, because I went to school with him and I knew his family, his parents, and so on. And I ended up finding him and arresting him. And that was 32 years ago. And he's still in prison. Uh, and we still communicate. And I'm the only person left on this earth that he can communicate with outside of prison, and the only person who is willing to, because you can't live in prison without having some outside um, support, financial support. So I still send him a few bucks every month to be able to get things from the commissary and such. But that was a mistake. Me going after and arresting somebody that I actually had a personal connection with, and
But the bureau, like, wouldn't stop that from happening? Like, it's not against
oh,
the
I mean, it's, well, first of all, you have to have, I mean, if there's a conflict of interest, I mean, say for instance, I mean, this guy was my best friend and I wanted to figure out how not to arrest him, and somehow protect him. Well, obviously that would, that'd be a conflict of interest. It'd be an issue, but I was, I felt like I was best equipped to be able to find the guy and arrest him, and I did. But I mean, generically speaking, it's not a good idea to have any kind of a connection to a case. And agents, for the most part, would be able to just say, "This is no, I shouldn't have this case because I have some connection of some sort. My wife knows their wife, or whatever it might be, or there's some financial connection, even distant." I mean, I would suggest that it wouldn't be the bureau that would have to step in, but agents would take care of that themselves.
And, I was just wondering too, did you have a partner or, like, a team you worked with?
Uh, I would say that probably most agents, it uh, probably for the most part worked on their own, but they had somebody on the squad that they could rely on. That if they had an interview to do, they were familiar with them. They were familiar with the way they worked, how they worked. That they would call on maybe the same person to go with them. Now, for me, I did have partners, and I had partners because working violent crime, particularly fugitives, when you're out chasing leads to find a fugitive, well, all of a sudden you find the fugitive. It's not always a great idea to be by yourself. So I had partners that I worked with almost my entire career.
And when you were working on these cases, did you work with local law enforcement?
It, to be able to be effective, it's important to have relationships with local law enforcement. It's important to know local law enforcement. It's important to be known to local law enforcement. It's important to trust local law enforcement. It's important to have them trust you. So it's absolutely important, and it goes a long way to being an effective FBI agent to have those kinds of relationships. And I often did.
And did you have to, like, were there any instances, this is from also a TV show, but did you have to be invited by the local law enforcement to work on a case, or did you have more jurisdiction there?
There's when you were asking earlier about some of the myths. Well, some of the myths that go along with this whole thing is that the FBI comes in and just takes over. It's hopefully it's more tactful than that. But if it's a particularly if it's a federal crime in federal jurisdiction and it's FBI jurisdiction, then there has to be an understanding. The FBI is going to be the lead on this case, or going to be the lead investigative agency. If it's a state case, and then the law enforcement, they're going to have state law enforcement, county, city, they're going to have their own jurisdiction, their own responsibility to take care of it. If they ask for FBI assistance, there's oftentimes mechanisms to be able to do that. If they're looking to track down somebody that's out of state as a witness, and they need somebody to go out and knock on doors, then and they ask the FBI to help out, the FBI will help out sometimes.
And did you ever work on any international cases, or did you have to stick to the U.S. border?
Well, I mean, it, there were cases that had international nexus. There was a fugitive that was wanted out of Australia, who was in Mexico, and I was down on the southern border during that time, and I worked with the Mexican state judicial police. Got the person, got him into the U.S., got him extradited to Australia, and I had to go to Australia a couple of times and testified in the guy's trial. There was a case, I believe it was um, Switzerland. Maybe it was a new agreement for provisional warrants, and I found a guy that was wanted out of Switzerland and arrested him, and so had an international nexus.
Okay, so you were allowed to work on cases that aren't just like in the border.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, and there's the FBI does a lot of that. In fact, the FBI has legal attaches stationed throughout the world to be able to cover leads and work with local jurisdictions and different countries. So there is a huge component of the FBI that's international.
And how common are task force? Did you like are they something that pop up a lot?
Well, there's been different eras in the FBI, and when I was there, task force were kind of on the again at the beginning stages for the FBI to run task force. So there were fugitive task forces, there were violent street gang task forces, violent crimes task forces, and it's important to be able to put those task forces together because that the resources of 5 agencies brought under one umbrella to work a particular violation, it adds that much more scope and dimension to it and expertise. So, yeah, the task forces are important. They continue to this day, and they are a very strong instrument of all law enforcement, not just the FBI.
Did you have to apply to be on a task force, or were you asked to be, or how was like assigned, I guess?
Typically you're assigned. I was on a fugitive task force, and I was assigned by the FBI and said go down and report to the folks at the fugitive task force, and that was it. I was on a gang task force. Same thing. You're assigned to go to the gang task force, go down there and introduce yourself, and go to work.
Did you ever have to do any undercover work?
I did. It was there were only 2 times that I did, because oftentimes when it's a true undercover operation, then it has a lot of requirements to it. It has you call on then people who are undercover agents who have been trained and have that particular expertise. But in one case, it was I had to um, portray myself as a truck driver that was transporting stolen goods to be able to talk to some people that I wanted to investigate. And what better way to do that than actually be within that group? So I was an undercover truck driver for a very short period of time. Um, there was a person who was suspected of kidnapping young women and and it's all sex trafficking. So one of my fellow agents had a case, and I worked it with him, and we had to go to. We actually went to a Frank Sinatra concert and went to a Frank Sinatra concert so we could meet the subject of the case. And again, we were acting in undercover capacity, so we went and had dinner with them. Were hanging out with them to learn more about them and learn more about what they were doing and try to get the information that we needed.
Did you enjoy doing undercover work? Is that something like you wanted to do when you left the academy, or
I mean, I didn't have a particular a particular desire to do it. My desire was basically uh, to to work violations of federal statute. My goal was I wanted to arrest people for violating federal statute. So, and I've thought about this, and from me personally, I mean, you think about people who conduct investigations, and I think homicide investigators are, in terms of skill level and the knowledge that they need to have to truly investigate a homicide. I mean, they're way up here in terms of what's required to do a real investigation. For me, I saw myself not so much, and it sounds kind of silly, but not so much as an investigator, but as a fixer. So if a bank got robbed, then it was up to me to go fix it. And to fix it meant that I had to catch the robber before he robbed another bank. I had to catch the robber before he or she hurt somebody. So I was a fixer. So I had to fix it. And I saw myself in that capacity more than I did an investigator, because when you fix things, there are steps you take. If you're working on a car, there are certain steps you take to change the oil. Step one, two, three, four. And that's how I carried out my investigations. It was through the basic steps to get to the end result, which was to find the bank robber and arrest him, interview him and get him to give you a confession, um, and send him to prison.
If you don't mind, like, what would be the steps of solving a violent crime? You can pick one, like bank robbery if you choose.
Well, let's just use bank robbery as an example. I mean, when you think about um, bank robbers, they're, first of all, you've got to be pretty desperate to go rob a bank. And during the time that I was working bank robberies, the surveillance cameras were actually 35 millimeter film cameras. So when the teller would hit the alarm, that would get the camera rolling, and it's actually burning 35 millimeter film, taking photographs of the person who's robbing the bank. And then there was the old analog recordings, video recordings. So step one is you find out if you've got uh, photographs. And then if you've got photographs of the bank robber, most of the time you would figure out the area of the robbery. So you'd say, okay, it was in this particular area of town. There are certain areas of town where people gravitate to, especially drug users. So you would take the photograph from the bank robbery and show it to your informants in those areas and show it around. And it was more times than not, you'd find somebody that would see the photograph and identify who it was. Then once you identified who the bank robber was, then you would go to the bank with a photo lineup, and the bank tellers, the victim tellers and other witnesses, they go through the photo lineup and they pick out the person who robbed the bank. And it happens to be the person that you suspect. You get a warrant for their arrest. You go find them and arrest them.
Did you do a lot of traveling? Like, or were they in the area a lot of the time?
Well, and things have changed a bit, I know, in the FBI, but um, back in the day, things were very strict. And when I say strict, it was strict that you're assigned to the FBI division at San Francisco, say, for example. Well, that territory that is covered by the San Francisco division is basically your boundaries. You don't just wander off into Sacramento's territory or San Diego's territory or up to Seattle. It didn't work that way. So if you needed to get something done in another division, you'd send a lead. So you'd write up paperwork, put all the background, and then you would send the lead to say, I need you to go out and look for this car, interview this person, conduct this particular investigation. So it was all about paper. And back then, you weren't even allowed to make a phone call to an agent in another office, because then it wasn't covered on paper. Everything you did was covered on paper, so that you could go to the file and you would see everything that was done, how it was done, when it was done, and who did it.
Wow. Okay. How long did it take typically? I mean, this is hard to answer, but to solve like a bank robbery?
It took longer than you would like it to take, because the bank robbers were recidivists, so they would continue to rob. And That's a bad thing, but it's also, if you're going to catch somebody, it's something that works in your favor to catch them, because if they rob more banks, they're going to make mistakes. They make mistakes and they get arrested. So it depended. I mean, I went to a bank robbery one day, and I looked at the note and I could tell it was something that was carried in somebody's wallet. I turned over the bank robbery demand note, and it was on the back side was a pay stub, and it was a pay stub of the person who robbed the bank. So all I had to
Jeez.
do was go to the employer and say, who is this person? Do you have an employee photograph? Do you know what their address is? Are they working? Are they And it turns out the person had been fired. They had an employee photograph. Took the photograph. Did a photo lineup. The teller picked out the guy, and same day he was in custody.
Did you work with the media a lot to like for if you wanted to put out like that photograph per se?
Yeah, and you see that on local television broadcasts where they have a photograph of a bank robber, seeking the community's help to get the photograph out. I mean, that's obviously that's something that can be very helpful, but it didn't happen all the time, because when I was working in California, that there were sometimes four bank robberies a day in the division. So I don't think the news would have been too keen on constantly showing a stream of unknown bank robbery photographs.
When you went out into the field, like was there certain equipment you needed to bring with you or like a bag or something or
Well, that's a good question, and one of the things at the academy that they told us is to always carry $100 bill in your credentials for emergencies, because every day was a different day. Every day was a day that you might end up. When you ask about traveling, sometimes there were occasions that you traveled. There was an occasion that I got a call and they said, "Hey, we need you to engage in this surveillance," and it was a foreign counterintelligence case. And so now myself and a group of other agents are following this person. And next thing you know, we've gone not only out of our division, but we've gone 3 divisions away following this person. So, we ended up having to stay in a hotel. So I always try to keep, when they talk about emergency preparedness, having a go bag. I always try to have a go bag, have the toiletries and things, so that if I went somewhere unexpectedly or had to go somewhere unexpectedly, that I'd be able to have things I needed to take care of myself. Elsewise, and for me, because I worked violent crimes, I had um, a rifle in the trunk of the car. I had a shotgun in the passenger compartment. Obviously, I carried a pistol, I carried handcuffs, and carried my credentials. And back then, carried a map book, because there were no navigation apps, there were no smartphones. It was, if you had to be in touch with people, you had to carry quarters to be able to use pay phones. You had to have map books to be able to get around, and you're flipping pages to, when you're in a hurry to get somewhere, you're flipping pages to be able to figure out where you're going. I mean, it was definitely a different world.
were you allowed to tell like your family that you were leaving or where you were going?
That too is kind of a myth, that there's all these things you can't tell anybody, you can't tell your family, you can't talk about. Most of the stuff, uh, it's not classified, so it's not covered under the laws that would govern classified materials. It's kind of common sense things. I mean, you're not going to go out talking about a fugitive that you're chasing before the fugitive is arrested. You're not going to talk about anything that might have some sensitive law enforcement component to it. So you just had to be careful about what you talked about, but it wasn't this crazy. I can't tell my wife anything, and I'm gone for weeks at a time, and she has no idea where I'm at. That almost never happened.
Were you allowed to bring cases like case files home to work on or was it only like you had to
No,
stay in the
no,
office?
and again, things have changed dramatically, because a lot of stuff now can be carried in tablets, on laptops and phones, and you can have access to information. Back when I was an FBI agent, they called them serials. So every piece of paper that went into a file had it was numbered, basically a serial number. So they'd go into the file. If you needed to take that piece of paper out, you'd have to go, just like going to the library, you'd have to go check it out. And you would check it out. You could take it to your desk and you could read it at your desk. You could take it out in the field with you, but recognizing that if for some reason that you lost it, you're going to be in big trouble. So most times you didn't take things out of the office. You would take it to your desk. You had a little work file. You'd put it in your little work file. You had a work box. There's a workbox room. You take the workbox and put it in the workbox room anytime you're out of the office. Come into the office, you can take it out, and you're only allowed to keep the serials for a certain period of time. You'd have to put them back into the file.
But it makes sense though. I mean, I guess you wouldn't want a page of the file to go missing, right? So
Yeah, it makes sense because it's very much information control. You've got to keep very tight control of these materials because they could range everywhere from just law enforcement sensitive all the way to top secret and even above that. So you there was an absolute need to be able to maintain and monitor the whereabouts of those documents and such. Like I said, now it's probably different because people can put things on tablets and notebooks and so on and so forth. So
are there any other cliches that authors should try to avoid that you've seen yourself, like on TV or in books?
you know, it's and I'll say, and I think I said up front is I don't watch shows about the FBI or the FBI files TV shows or I just don't and I don't because there are a lot of these misconceptions and such, so it's almost better just not even bother watching it. But there are all kinds of I think misconceptions and falsehoods about what FBI agents do. The key thing and the most important thing for anybody writing about an FBI agent is to recognize what that character is responsible for in their job, because there are so many jobs in the FBI. There are jobs that the hostage rescue team, for example, those agents they work exclusively on these tactical squads. So they don't investigate cases, they don't work cases. Their entire job every day is to go and ensure their tactical prowess and that they are the best at what they do. You have agents that are you mentioned undercover agents earlier. There's agents who work undercover. They're a lot of their career. There were back in the day, there were FBI agents who infiltrated the weather underground, and they were gone for years in undercover operations where they had to turn in their credentials before they left, and they were years working these undercover personas. You have people that work foreign counterintelligence, so it's important to know what, if you're writing about somebody, what it is that they do, and then being able to understand what that really means, because it's like having one umbrella that has hundreds and hundreds of jobs underneath it.
And if an author is writing and the main character is an FBI agent, what are some main characteristics that they should possess to even just get into the academy or anything like
Talking about the stereotypical kind of the mythology that it's this very stoic, very straight laced, very certain kind of a personality traits. Every person is different. Every human is different. Every FBI agent is different. Every FBI agent has a different motivation for getting into the FBI. Every person that's in the FBI has a different way of carrying out their responsibility. So there's no one cookie cutter kind of a trait. I think what if there are any traits is that folks are typically they're highly motivated. They are willing to commit to something and see it through, all the way from starting at the academy, committing to that rigorous training, completing it, committing yourself to working maybe long hours, working on very complicated, complex cases. So there's a certain dedication to it. I think there are a lot of agents who have backgrounds that where they were um, athletic, so they had that same kind of a training regimen and that same kind of an attitude about approaching athletics. They approach their jobs the same way in the FBI. The FBI has the thing I think that is important to recognize is that it's a very competitive job. To get a job as a special agent with the FBI, it's incredibly competitive. So that means that you already have a group of people who have accomplished a lot of things in their relatively early careers to get to where they are.
Well, I just want to thank you again, Walter, for joining me. This has been an amazing conversation.
Well, I don't feel like I've been a lot of help to you in terms of being able to profile what an agent would look like, what an agent would sound like, what an agent does each day. But it's a very broad perspective that we're looking at, and to be able
It
to
is.
narrow it down into a very slim focus is very difficult. So I think what I would say to anybody is to recognize how diverse the agent population is, how diverse the FBI responsibility is.
No, your information is very valuable. I mean, just even listening to it, I can pick out details that I think an author can definitely use to help their story be more fact-based and really build in their world. So it's going to be really valuable. I really do appreciate it. And it was such a
All right.
personal treat. I mean, it was one of my dream careers as a kid, so this was a nice treat for me too.
Yeah. Well, I think, and that too is, I think one of the things that I was very impressed with when I went to the academy is how many people that it was a dream job for, and they were there fulfilling their dream.
Well, thank you very much.